welcome to this week's edition of Two Men in the Middle. We're two men, three men this week, discuss politics, current events from left, right, and center. I'm Brandon Koenig.
I'm Greg Huey.
And I'm Jason Peterson.
So let's get started this week. We're 1 week out from the attack last week, the insurrection that had us all just in shock. So, I think before we move on to impeachment, as the dust has settled over what happened last week and we start to see more and more of these rioters and domestic terrorists arrested one by one, what are thoughts, feelings, anything different from what we originally felt last week in the wake of all this happening?
I'll start. First, I'm glad that we do see there being some responsibility held. That the FBI and whoever else is involved is obviously thorough, pulling video and showing photos of their top 10 at a time listed, and it seems to be working because we see different people arrested and it's creating some accountability. That's great. At the same time, as more time passes, I think I get more nervous about what's coming in the next few weeks. I certainly don't see that extremist group calming down, and the increased police presence and military presence around the Capitol heightens the tension. It's necessary, but I'm sure it heightens the tension. And we hear kind of the under the surface concerns about all 50 states and capitals being at risk, and senators and representatives wearing bulletproof vests, and a different topic of which ones are armed and which ones aren't. But this does not set up itself for a good recipe in the next 2 weeks. And I'm very nervous about more violence and death, frankly.
Yeah, I think I've gone from heartbreak to a sense of dread. And the dread comes from, I think the real rough patches on this are still ahead of us. I saw the FBI came out this week and basically said there was way too much organization involved in this riot for this to be a spontaneous event. There's a level of planning that went into this that's just starting to come into view that I think when that all comes out, it's just going to add layers to the complexity of this issue and also kind of our feelings of this issue too. I also go ahead, Jason.
And if none of the core issues are different than they were 2 weeks ago or last week, that continues going forward too.
And probably in some aspects, not only the core issue is not different, but there's even more rage and I think eagerness by these extremists to do something because they saw what happened last week and they saw how close they were to actually, they did temporarily stop certification and they paused the peaceful transition of power. And so if anything, they're just more motivated now to do more because they saw what they were able to do.
There was a lot of effectiveness there and that they'll feed off of that.
And right. There's a sense of pride in what they did. There's a sense of they accomplished what they spent out to accomplish. So how do you calm this down? How do you tell people, hey, let's reevaluate what you're doing, when I think the general consensus from the group that was there is they were invited to be there and they did what they were invited to do and they're proud of it.
Yeah, the obvious disconnect there is that they don't see what they did as wrong. Many of them don't. They are very upfront about, they see this as necessary and whatever it takes. And they refer to themselves as patriots and that their cause is a just cause. But oddly enough, their willingness to be so upfront about it is their undoing, because really that's the filming it, recording it, wanting to have it live on all these different platforms, and made it much easier for police and the American public to identify them, point them out. In some of these cases, it was family members and close friends of these people who identified them and went to law enforcement.
A lot of ex-wives had a really good day, like Thursday, Friday. Yep, I know what that is. Jason, how many cops and firemen and military? That's what keeps kind of, every time I see a tweet of, ex-military or two active police officers were involved in this, it just kind of sends a shot through me because, I'm generally not a conspiracy person, but I would not be shocked if it came out there was a large contingency of ex-military, ex-police that were involved in this or involved in planning this.
And that's part of it that feeds the dread you mentioned before, because if that is true, I really hope it's not, but if that is true, that's still there, and that's still allowing additional planning to happen now. It's something we brought up last week that I think you guys rightly shot down, which was this idea of not having the usual historical pageantry around the inauguration and virtual or something like that. The more I reflect on it, though, like that's the easy way out. Doing something completely different, unexpected, whether it's virtual or somewhere else, and being really quick about it removes the visualization that they can use. If there's a lot of military presence and the extremists want to make an impact, they're going to time it when Biden's there and when the inauguration is going on and when when the power handoff occurs, and just as much of a visual of outside clashing with police and National Guard while the inauguration is going on is probably just as meaningful for being disruptive as marching on the actual Capitol and going into the Capitol buildings. So I do wonder if one way around it is to not publicly now, but on the 20th, do something different. The inauguration happens at a different place, or it's in the Roosevelt Room or something. And it'd be a shame if what you guys spoke about, the historical pageantry and majesty and all that, it wasn't there, but it would take the wind out of the sails of an extremist group trying to make a point, right?
But for people that are marching to the Capitol on the 20th, why? What are they marching for? I mean, at least the 6th, there was a thread. Hey, we're here at the president's invite to protest the certification of the election. What are they protesting on the 20th?
You're talking about hellraisers. They don't just need something to protest, right? It's almost anarchists, like the classic sense of they want to make a show. They want to just have destruction. They want to ruin democracy as we know it because they didn't get what they wanted.
And these are people that are extremists. I mean, the rally on the 6th was called "Stop the Steal." And all of the language and all of the chatter on social media was, "We're going to stop this." And granted, many of them that were there did not storm the Capitol and take part in that, but all of the rhetoric surrounding it, all of the discussion was about making noise and about stopping democratic procedures, the cogs of democracy. And in this case, it's much the same. I mean, these are people that don't view Biden as a legitimate president, and they are seeking to stop him. And that's why all of the online chatter, particularly on Parler, there was so much of it that was not only incendiary, but was actually invoking direct violence against members of Congress and Biden. And that's why, too, all of these reinforcements have to happen. I mean, the Capitol itself, this is the first time they're not going to have any people on the National Mall. So they could move it, but I think at this point, with all of the security that they're putting in place and the perimeters that are being added, it's going to be so fortified, and nobody is going to be, able to be up close unless you are part of the day's events anyway. And I'm still of that mindset. I don't like the idea of changing the optics of it, because I think that if you do that, it's like letting the terrorists win. And I don't want to give them any type of even moral victory to say that, they were successful and actually causing us to change a procedure that we've done this way, for 200 years. There's just so much wrapped up in that and who we are as a country. And it's the one way that we can come together. And so, granted, nobody's going to be there, right? Because they're telling, the mayor of the District of Columbia said Americans should not travel out, but it's going to be televised. And it's one way that we can kind of come together and we can be able to turn a leaf on, everything that's happened. Or I said, turn the page on everything that's happened and begin anew.
So, Jason, I agree with you. If you show up on the 20th, you're just there to raise hell and cause problems. So if there are problems on the 20th, does the few bad apple theory that the Republicans are pushing hard to explain the 6th, there is no just a few bad apples on the 20th, right? If you show up, everyone's a bad apple who shows up on the 20th.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I also, with tensions as high as they'll be and so much military presence as they'll be there, it's going to look a lot different anyway. And the actual method of the process of the inauguration, I assume, will be a lot different because of the perimeter and because of the security. So part of me is like, the imagery that we see on the television, well, I agree with Brandon completely on the emotional connection of like this needs to happen for historical reasons, cultural reasons, and turning the new page, etc. It's already going to look different, I feel like. And whether there's the people who are going there are well aware of the danger, well aware of the history of the last 2 weeks, and they're looking for trouble. And that's a shame because they've already ruined it. They've already been effective in that sense.
That there's going to be no separating out on the 20th like there was in the 6th, that some of these people were here to peacefully protest for election fairness and for looking at how we conduct a free and fair election. And there was a few bad apples that decided to riot. If after seeing the pictures of the military presence at the Capitol, over 20,000 armed soldiers, if you show up, I think the folks, the soldiers at the Capitol have to assume the worst intention for the crowd that shows up.
Yeah, and the optics of it, I don't want to bury it, but the imagery we've seen the last 2 weeks of National Guard people walking through the Capitol building. And all the ornate fixtures and paintings, everything behind it. It rubs me the wrong way. I get it from a security perspective, but to me, it already looks like now it's a military coup or something,
What do you think of Airbnb just telling everybody, hey, sorry, you know what? If you were thinking about coming to the inauguration or DC for any reason and staying in an Airbnb, we're just not going to do it.
Well, again, it's a private company that's taking action, and I think it's actually smart. I mean, to do that, because Airbnb also has access to all of the records of people that use their service and stayed at homes in the DC area last week, and they've already identified and said that many of them who did were people that participated in the protests, some of whom may have been involved in the riot and the insurrection. So it does play into a broader narrative. I think that's a good segue into what we have seen over the last 7 days is private companies and corporate America more generally react in many ways. And basically, we've seen that the law or politicians can be very slow to react and slow to do the right thing. But we've witnessed corporate America take pretty strong and swift action, whether it's against the protesters, against people that rioted, employers firing individuals, as well as many of these companies that donate to politicians, cutting off either political donations completely or targeting those members who voted against certification. So what is the reaction to that? It's been fascinating to watch that backlash develop. And some would say from a corporate standpoint, it's smart because, again, you don't want your brand, your company, to be identified with those individuals, that type of behavior. But it does stand out in contrast to what we see in Washington.
Brandon, let me ask you this. I can't think of a single conservative or Republican that has ever called to boycott any company. My point here being the we're going to get businesses to not like you anymore. That's a complete tactic of the left. I can't think of a single person on the right or conservative that has called for a corporate boycott of anything based on somebody's political beliefs. Am I wrong in that? But
there have been conservatives at one time or another over things who have called for boycotts. It's been on a much smaller scale. I'm trying to think of, for example, when Dick's Sporting Goods removed firearms from their stores after one of the mass shootings, there were conservatives that called for boycotts of them. There's been. I'm trying to think of another kind of big example.
But my point is that this is boycotting something falls way more into the core beliefs of Democrats and liberals than it does conservatives, I believe. I think that's
they do, but I would say that what we're seeing corporate America do is different than like a boycott, right? Because a boycott is something that's grassroots driven, and it's a group of people that say, "Hey, we're not going to shop here or do business here." In many of these cases, I'm talking about over last week, these are companies that just immediately and proactively said, "We're taking this action. We're going to."
I guess my point is they've been primed to do that by the liberal Democrats. I think they got out in front of it because they know that this is kind of one of the standard plays we run in our playbook. I personally hate this. The boycotting, the the unpersoning of people, the canceling. I just don't understand what that does. And I get it. Everybody's pissed and everybody's scared. So right now, yes, safety is number one. And if we have to, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more, but if we have to trample somebody's rights for a little bit, I'm at the place where so be it. There's a greater good that needs to be served. I'm also aware of, I just said the thing that like every heinous dictator ever said right before they went out and did something completely historically terrible. So I don't like this. I don't think this is the way to play the game. I think this is making politics sport. And that's part of what our problem is. And I think all of this just should be knocked off. I don't think it's helpful at all.
So I'm curious what you think, Jason, because I actually disagree with Craig on this, because I see this as different than cancel culture, at least to me. So what's your take on this?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I agree. Let me go with a couple concrete examples, and maybe you could. And I'd be interested if Craig thought of a couple because he's obviously passionate about this one. So first one, I heard today, I think it was United, one of the major airlines said, we're going to ban all weapons, not just from being on board, obviously, but even packed, not carry on. What's the other word I'm missing here? Checked baggage, right? You can't bring it even as checked baggage. So if you're going to DC from wherever you're coming, you cannot bring any weapons whatsoever. And to the point of a safety thing, like that's a huge move. That right off the bat, if you're going to take a plane from somewhere else in the country, we just minimized some of the damage that you can do if you're an extremist going there. So I think that's commendable right there, and it doesn't have to be permanent.
But that's a perfect example, I think, of my point. That's an example of temporarily suppressing rights because there's a safety issue. And once we get past the safety issue, those rights need to be restored. It makes perfect sense for United to say, hey, not this week, guys. It's not going to happen. The cost, the risk are too much. We're not doing it. And I get that. But that is a suppression of somebody's Second Amendment rights. I adamantly don't agree with those rights, but
it's a private company that's dictating this.
You
it's
don't
not
have
the
a right
government.
to take a gun on a plane necessarily. I mean, you don't have, again, because that's where someone else's rights, a private company's rights to have their own policies kind of conflict with your own individual rights.
Listen,
how is that different from putting one of those stickers on the front of your office door that says, no weapons allowed inside the Sprint building or whatever?
I thought this was a really good example until I started arguing for guns on planes and realized that I was completely in an area that I didn't want to be in. So I'd like to retract that was the perfect example of my point.
Okay, Craig, here's another example that's actually kind of similar, has to do with planes. What about, I heard a lot this week, and I haven't read all the details, but again, with airlines who are adding these people to no-fly list, like protesters and people that participated in the riots, and they're basically putting them on no-fly list so they can't fly on their airline.
I'm totally fine with that. That to me squarely falls into there has to be some sort of penalty for your actions. This is what I would do. If you entered the Capitol and you were one of those ladies walking around just thinking it was a tour, not understanding what you were doing and walking through the rotunda, and maybe you didn't understand what you were doing because number one, the president told you to show up and get wild, and number two, the cops let you in. I mean, what?
They didn't let you in.
They did. They opened doors. They moved barricades. My only point is that if that person simply entered the Capitol building, what I would say as a punishment is, number one, you're on probation for a year. Number two, you're registered as a domestic terrorist. And number three, you can't fly for 12 months. That seems very fair to me.
I agree. I'm curious though. Do you think anybody who walked through those Capitol doors, do you think that they had some sort of mistake about whether or not they were there rightly, or that like they had a right to be there, that they were there under following the rules in the hours that it was open or whatever?
I freely admit, Jason, I am looking for anything to try to see how my fellow American citizens could have done what they did. I
love that about you, because it destroys my sense of my fellow citizen, and you're still looking for the good, which is fantastic.
I'm going to interject here just to say one thing, Craig, because I've watched a lot of these videos that many of them took and self-posted, where they filmed themselves inside the Capitol, and I have yet to find one where they say, I've entered the Capitol or I've come in. All of them use language like, we stormed the Capitol today. We were taking back our country today. It was all inflammatory. So that tells me that, again, from the ones that I saw, they knew what they were doing. I have yet to see one who has taken video inside the Capitol where they did not refer to it as an insurrection or a civil war or a storming of the building. And yeah, the police opened the barricades for them, and that's something that's a whole different matter that must be investigated and corrected. But that didn't just happen organically. Those barricades were removed because of the crowds kept pushing and pushing forward because they were trying to get past police and past the barricades. So this was an example of they just walked gingerly inside, like in an orderly fashion. I mean, this was a mob that was doing everything possible to get past the barricades that had been erected and to get inside that Capitol. They were going to do anything they could.
I mean, everything YouTube said has been completely accurate. And I agree with everything you've said. I just wrote down path to redemption. Part of the problem of how we've gotten ourselves in this spot is you cannot offer people no path back to the main tribe. When you do, you splinter people off into what we have today. What those people did, even if you just got swept up in the crowd and never thought you would be in the building and realized 15 minutes in, oh shit, I've made a horrible mistake. Number one, there has to be a punishment for that. I'm not saying all of this has to go punishment, but what I hate about cancel culture and now these companies jumping on board, we can't just destroy everybody we disagree with. There's got to be some sort of scale that the only thing that we really want to do to you is ostracize you from the group. I think that's why we're in the boat we're in.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because here's the other thing. I think if you rewind the last few months and years, part of the reason we've gotten to this point is at least the left and maybe even the middle's demonization of the right and the far right. And I think that has led to so much anger and resentment and my tribe versus your tribe. And if last week hadn't happened, it'd be so much easier to lean on that as this is what has to be corrected to move forward. And again, now a tiny minority of people who voted for Trump stormed the Capitol and did all these terrible things. And like even some of this conversation, we lumped them all into one big bucket. And how we pull that out, how we punish the people who were involved, and still somehow, like you said, maybe they get a path to redemption, or at least they're carved out of the larger group that is so dismayed with government and the left and Democrats and the Obama years or whatever it was that led up to today. Like, they're still there. They're not violent. They're not storming the Capitol. They're still pissed. And that's not being healed or solved. There's no salve there while we're all on this other.
Well, and I just want to stick with that for a second, Jason, because I think that's a key. I think we need to separate out those who were there, did not participate in the storm in the Capitol, showed up, protests, went home, versus everybody else, right? So I think there has to be caution to not lump them all together and to refer to everybody who was there as an insurrectionist or terrorist. So that's part of it. But just alluding to what we had discussed on last week's podcast, I think part of the reaction to this and the reason why, there has been, companies firing people and and some of the swift reaction is that people have noticed the contrast, right, between other types of protests, particularly when, people that are black and brown are arrested immediately, versus this, where these people did what they did and were able to go home and fly home. And it was, only days later that they were finally being held accountable. So people noticed that there was a difference in how people were treated initially this time versus other times. And so I think that plays into this whole argument as well, because that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, naturally.
Yeah, I guess the overall impression that about the people who were not the people who committed actual crimes, but just the people who kind of stormed the Capitol. Let's talk about just on TV. I thought this protest was mostly just people surrounding the building. It took like a couple hours to realize, oh shit, there are hundreds of people physically actually inside the Capitol. And there's like three layers to this. There's the people that just came to protest and support the president and went home. Then there was the people who went to the Capitol and trespassed on Capitol grounds. And then there's the people who participated in a violent insurrection. We can't treat, and then there's this huge group of people, like half the country, who did vote for this man. So what the left is attempting to do, not the left, the Democrats, because it's just a pure political play. And Brandon, you've been around politics, so when there's blood in the water, you go at it. There's blood in the water. There's an opportunity to set the Republican Party back a decade by taking every single member of the Republican Party and lumping them with the people who entered the Capitol violently. And while I am wholly unsympathetic to Republicans and unsympathetic to Trump supporters, you just can't do that. That's not fair. That's not how this should play. So instead of packing all of those people together and attacking them, how do we go about this really complicated process of, okay, one thing is not like the other. A protester, I guess this is what I want to say. A Trump voter is not a protester, and a protester is not a rioter, and a rioter is not an insurrectionist. There's layers to this, and we have to treat these people differently.
Yeah,
what we need here. Sorry, you asked Brandon. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, absolutely. I think we have to have fundamental recognition that there is an extreme element, and it's not all of Trump supporters. It's not even half of them, but there's an extreme fringe element that are, believe that, they can and should be able to overturn an election, do not believe Biden is a legitimate president, believe that nothing is off bounds in terms of being able to resolve that as they see it in their minds. So there is a need to separate those people out and say, hey, this is not mainstream. This is not what we are about as a country. If you supported Trump and you're peaceful and, you abhor this like everybody else does, you're not the person that we're going after. You're not somebody that should be targeted, and you should not even be part of this conversation. This is about an extreme element. And if we're going to get to the roots of solving this too, we have to look at the extremism online that incites people to commit these acts. So looking at QAnon, looking at 4chan, looking at, these groups that inhabit a very far right, very extreme, violent part of the party, but not the entire party and not even half of the party. And so
I don't need too hypocritical here. Because if I were leading the DNC right now, we would have one mission: wipe the Republican Party off the face of the earth. This is our time. It would be a full-on assault. Everything we could throw at the Republicans right now, we would be doing it. Because if that's the rules of the game, if it's just pure politics and it's a zero-sum power move, then this is the chance. You may never get another chance like this to really damage the Republicans for the next 50 years. You have to do it.
there's the root of the problem, though, because we're playing politics with ultimately what you want is unity of the American people. In my head, when you were saying, how is this fixed? It's exactly how Brandon spoke. You need leadership. You need a leader on the right. The leader on the right is the extremist. It's Trump. Where's the other voice? If you actually had a right-leaning policy leader who got up there and said, guys, listen, the election was fair. We lost this one, but we're going to get the next one. Here's how we're going to do it. And you lay out a strategy for what the next 4 years looks like, and you get people to rally around the principles that Republicans and conservatives believe in, rather than BS, rather than noise. That's how you do it. And unfortunately, you can't do that overnight. You have to have somebody in place, and they earn respect, and they present their case over time, and they collect people over time. And there's not even an attempt to do that right now. Everybody's still today deferring to Trump as the leader on the right. It can't last.
Well, and part of the problem, Jason, is there is a vacuum right now in the party, right? Because there's only been Trump for 4 years. And Senator John Thune said it best last week. He said, we've been a party built around one personality, one person for the past 4 years. We need to be a party of ideas again. And he's absolutely right. And so there have been several who have said that, but as far as the leader, the person who can unite the party and be that person, that remains to be seen. I mean, I don't know who that person is. I've yet to see them. So I just don't know that there's anybody at this time who commands that presence and that respect and the support of a majority of the party to be able to fill those shoes. And I don't know if anybody will for a while, because again, there's such a large segment of the party that's still under Trump's spell. And I think until that changes and until Trump is out of the picture, no longer in office, and has become irrelevant, I don't think you can move on and any leader can gain traction. Because nobody, even if they had tried, I would argue if there had been somebody who would say and do all the right things and had tried over the last 4 years, they wouldn't have been able to make any headway because Trump was the leader. That's what it was.
So let's talk about the Republicans for a second. So first off, if Liz Cheney had a different last name, she may be a little bit more viable. Her last name kills her.
Yeah.
But Liz Cheney showed character and integrity and leadership, and appalled that she's being attacked by her colleagues, Republican colleagues.
It's so disgusting. I mean, trying to take away her leadership position. She had the best statement for why she was voting for impeachment, and I made that case clearly. And granted, she not only faces a loss of her leadership within the House Republican conference, but you have to remember she represents Wyoming, which voted over 70% for Trump. So she will likely have a primary opponent, and it'll be very difficult for her to hold on in the next election. So she put a lot on the line. I mean, she's one of those who put her political career on the line to do the right thing. And that's the type of person who should be supported and should be celebrated.
So I wrote out this little profile of Republicans in the House today. So, and I will say this is probably about 85% accurate, which anything that comes out of my mouth, 85% is the highest percentage of accuracy I could ever reach in anything. So there's 211 Republicans in concert. And Brandon, if I get any things wrong, just shout out wrong, and I'll stop and we'll correct those. So there's 211 Republicans in Congress. 121 of them voted to reject Arizona's electors. 131 voted to reject Pennsylvania's electors. That's post-insurrection riot. By the way, Republican members of Congress also voted to reject the electors of Nevada, Michigan, and a handful of other states. Okay. 197 Republicans voted not to impeach Trump Wednesday, and all 211 of them voted to reject the call on Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. So the first handful of votes in the 117 Congress has basically seen 147 Republicans vote for the following: reject state election results from a certified state results for the President of the United States, not to invoke the 25th Amendment, and not to impeach the president. So my question's back to you, Brandon, because You have been a Republican in the past, and you've worked on the Hill and all that stuff. I got to come up with a new line that you're the only Republican here. But if the 140, what do you do with those people? How do you even? I mean, I'm the guy here talking about path to redemption, all this shit. What's the path to redemption for those 147? Because I don't have it. There's no conversation I could have with those people that would be positive and productive.
So my personal viewpoint is that there should be less tolerance and less redemption for the political class that enabled this and in many ways contributed to the incitement that led to the insurrection. Because unlike the individuals who may have been caught up or who may have participated in the protests, these are people that are educated, that know better, that are acting out of purely political reasons, that have made decisions that have set themselves apart from their fellow members of Congress throughout history by disenfranchising millions of voters, by perpetuating a false, stolen election narrative. So and the problem too is you cannot have redemption for these people because they have not felt the consequences yet. These are people that should be censored at the very least by their colleagues. They should lose all committee leadership roles and assignments. They should lose any special privileges that would come with rank in the House as time goes on. None of that has happened yet. So I don't think we can talk about redemption until they are held responsible for what they have done. And in a perfect world, they would be held politically responsible at the ballot box. That is unlikely in many cases in a primary. I would love to see them primaried by, traditional responsible Republicans, but that's a fantasy. And
do you have a couple of dozen of those that you know? Because I don't.
No, but actually I was talking to somebody today who wants to run against Josh Hawley in his next race in the primary in Missouri. So I can't say who that person is right now, but he is somebody who does have good experience, someone who would be appealing. He's not somebody who would just come out of nowhere. But suffice it to say, that would still be an uphill climb in a Republican primary, right? Because you still have that Trump hold over the party. So it's a better probability in some of these swing districts and swing states that they would be held responsible in the general. What I see most likely to happen, and again, this cannot be overstated, the Republican Party is crashing and burning right now. And the future is in doubt. So one of two things is going to happen. These people, the Trump supporters, diehard Trump supporters, will splinter off and create their own party called the Patriot Party. There's already rumblings of many who have said they're going to do that. Or there are traditional Republicans that will split off and either join another movement or do something. And there's talk about that happening right now. But you cannot have a Republican Party that survives intact with people like Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney on one side, and then Lauren Boebert and from Colorado, and the QAnon congresswoman from
Florida,
Green from Georgia. I mean, I don't see how that can coexist going forward. It can't.
One of the things that strikes me though is you just said what was it, 147 out of 211, which is like 60-70%.
Yeah, that's way more than half.
That's not lopsided. Sorry, that is lopsided. It's not split. 70% are on the same page. That's such a minority then that's aligned with the left on this one.
And think about what Jason just said. I already forgot your math number. Was it like 65%?
70%, okay. I think. 70%
of the Republican members of Congress have voted to reject state electoral. I don't even want to say it again. It's insane. I mean, that's not a fringe element. That's mainstream Republican Party beliefs.
Really, you know how we've talked about for the last 4 years, the alt-right, which basically means the alternative right. So the alt-right has become the mainstream right. Okay. I mean, let's not mince words. The alt-right is the right now, and the mainstream right is really the alt-right. It's really the minority. What used to pass for mainstream conservative politics. So with that in mind, the question is, what is the next step. Like, where do we go from here? Because we have a party that is completely in the throes of this group. They have shown no signs of letting up, as we've seen over the last 7 days. They've stuck with this narrative. What I would like to see voters do in many of these states is go up when there is a chance to confront Josh Hawley at some point at a town hall or at a virtual town hall, ask him and others point blank, so you don't believe in democracy. So what type of system do you think we should have? Should we have an oligarchy? Should we have an autocracy? Because you have shown by your vote that you do not believe in democracy and you think millions of voters should be disenfranchised to, entertain the delusions of someone who has autocratic tendencies. So if democracy doesn't work, what's the alternative? Because really that is what they've chosen to support, and they need to be called out on it. This isn't some, conservative versus liberal politics or right versus left. This is about democracy versus alternative.
Something else.
Something else that we don't recognize. It doesn't fit with our Constitution. So if the Republican Party wants to become the autocratic party, that's fine. There's probably a space to inhabit there because there seems to be a segment of the population that supports that. But that means that normal constitutional minded Republicans need to desert the party and join a different movement. And maybe we'll have a third party that's viable for the first time in our nation.
Hey, Josh Hawley's not hiding. He wrote an op-ed in the Southeast Missourian.
I heard that. Yeah. Was it the
Southeast Missourian? Basically defending how his actions were basically just a good faith attempt to talk about election security.
Right. I mean, so, of course, I would have loved to see where's the context. What about, giving the supportive fist bump to the crowd before walking in? I mean, this whole chain of events was set in motion by what Josh Hawley did, followed shortly after by Ted Cruz. And so the appalling unwillingness to take responsibility, and it doesn't just stop there. I think there's more to come out. It'll be interesting to see if we learn that some of these people who participated in the insurrection were part of the tours that took place the day before the Capitol. That's being investigated by the FBI because there were congressmen, I think Biggs of Arizona, Mo Brooks of Alabama, who was also incendiary and insightful. And I forget the third one, but 3 of Trump's most staunchest supported congressmen gave tours to some individuals the day before, which was remarkable because tours have been shut down since the pandemic started in March. So there's a lot of questions. How did this get approved? How were these, groups of people allowed to take tours the day before? But if this is true, and if we find out more, it would explain a lot, because the biggest question that I've had since last week is how many of these people knew where to go. How many of them were able to find Nancy Pelosi's office, find Clyburn's office, which is unmarked. They knew where to go in a complex that is sprawling and where offices are tucked away behind corridors at the end of hallways. And having worked there myself, I mean, it took me the entire time working there to find offices. I still didn't know my way around completely by the end of the time I worked there.
Do you think we are in a minority of people who have read a tremendous amount of information the last 2 weeks and who are focused at this level? Here's my fear. Project forward 2 years when the first group comes up for re-election. How punitive is the regular population towards these people when they come up for re-election? Because is it just us armchair, pundits here, totally upset and angry, and everybody writing articles? And is it really the majority of the population either, I shouldn't say doesn't care, they probably care, but they don't see it as so foundationally upsetting as we do, and therefore these politicians aren't held accountable at the polls either, and they come back and they get reelected, and maybe even more come in with them.
Or perhaps 70%. Jason, it's not that they're not as upset as we are, but the question is, will this have staying power in 2 years? 2 years later, will most people still remember this as vividly and be as outraged about it? Or will that anger have subsided enough to where people kind of shrug and be like, that was 2 years ago. We've moved on. Right.
Yeah, I guess I think people do care. And my evidence of that is we just had record turnout during a pandemic to vote for the president of the United States. I think we just had record turnout in Georgia for a runoff election as well. So I think that's some evidence that the interest level is there. I think what I find interesting is how are people, what data are they hearing? How are they internalizing it? And is anybody's mind being changed? I think that's to me, somehow I'd like to know that's a metric we should be tracking. And how can we measure that? Is there anybody who honestly believed that this election was stolen? And I'm not even talking about believing the Linwood, the Kraken theory. Take all that silliness out, but simply believe that the states purposefully changed rules that would help Democrats and hurt Trump. If you believe the media has been in the tank from day one, out to get Donald Trump, and they purposefully coordinated with big tech to kill the Hunter Biden story. Jason, what source of data, new data, would you listen to that would change that? I think people are engaged. I think there's a lot of interest in this, but I don't think there's a lot of room to pivot anybody. We're all just in our tribes, all hyped up right now.
Well, and I think we accept that there's been a fair amount of misinformation over the last couple of years. And if there is no counter to that, and or you don't trust the counter to that, your story is the same. You still think it's stolen. You'll still think it's stolen next year. I don't see the way out of that. And that's maybe the scariest thing here, because then it seems like you can't turn the ship around.
So I think I'm a good example of that. My 6 weeks of constant immersion into Fox News has 100% altered some of my opinions. And you can see them tonight. I mean, some of these with sympathy for the rioters and that these people were egged onto it. And yes, there was a few bad apples, but that's me just parroting what Fox News has pounded me with since this happened. And really since the loss of the election, that these people need to be heard. There's half the country that feels this way. I guess my example is if you put yourself in that bubble and that's all you do, there's no escape. If you never turn it off, Fox or OAN or whatever some of these other peripheral news organizations are, you're locked in. Nobody is telling you anything other than what you exactly want to hear. And how do we change that? And to your point, Jason, who's going to look at people and say, you are wrong. That's not right. And say it with the authority and in a way that they accept.
You guys have seen those little 30-second Twitter clips of representatives being encountered by, voters in the streets, and they'll try to correct what was wrong, right? Like, hey, this election was actually fair. Our state did count the votes. It was triple checked by hand. It went through courts, and everything was validated up and up. And the person on the other side of that conversation just stops and doesn't believe it. They're shut down. And that's when it's one-on-one. That's not some, Fox TV spewing it to thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions.
Have you guys also been a little bit confused by, as some of these people are being arrested, they all have jobs? I mean, sure, there's the kook who the shaman and all that stuff, and they're just lunatics doing stupid shit. But every time you hear somebody that's been arrested, they're a retired military person. They're
a firefighter. The guy who was a firefighter threw the fire extinguisher at the place.
The one chick flew there in a private jet. I mean, these are not economically disadvantaged folks who've had enough and suddenly have decided, I have nothing left to lose. This is my only act of desperation. So these are people, I guess, who don't need to do this, but they feel compelled to. And they can feel compelled to so strongly, they're willing to kill a member of the Capitol Police Department, some of them with a fire extinguisher. What do you do? I mean, I hate that. And again, in our very unartful way, certain members of the media have talked about people need to be deprogrammed and the red states in the South need to be liberated. I cannot describe how uniquely unhelpful that is. I'm sure, Brandon, your Republican friends love it when somebody tells them they just need to be deprogrammed from a cult.
Yeah, well, and I remember a lot of Trump supporters reacted within last week. One of the news reporters, was it ABC News? I can't remember, referred to a cleansing, that there needed to be a cleansing. And so people took that as like ethnic cleansing. And
that's a horrible word.
That horrible word did not go down well. But I think what needs to happen is we need to recognize that these efforts that happen online, whether you're talking about QAnon or these other militia groups, like this is radicalization. So it's not unlike anybody who can be radicalized for religion, for other purposes. This is just happens to be a political radicalization. So that is happening. And that's why you can have CEOs, physicians, attorneys travel to DC and participate in this. People that you would think, hey, these are highly educated people that should know better, but anybody can be prone to being radicalized online. And the tactics used and the appeals that are used are not unlike what we saw with Islamist terrorism. I mean, it's two sides of the same coin. So the response has to be, we have to have some type of coordinated effort to dispel the misinformation online. We need some way to be able to educate people on, why this is wrong. It's interesting. I think it was in Norway, like one of the universities started a class on how to recognize misinformation. And it's something they started offering to retirees. And they've tied it into a benefits program. I think if you get retirement benefits and in Norway, like if you take this class, it opens the door for more benefits. So they incentivize it. But what it does is it tells you how to be able to spot actual news from fake news, paranoia, conspiracy from reality online, what to avoid, how to be discerning, think critically, question critically. We need something of that sort in the United States, and again, this isn't something that's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, this is something that's going to take years to develop because there isn't any quick or easy solution. But there has to be a massive information campaign, counter-information campaign that seeks to provide citizens with the tools to be able to question and to be able to get out from under the grips of this type of radicalization, because that's what it is. It's radicalization.
There has to be some historical precedent here. If we could invite an historian on, somewhere in the past, somebody who's been drowned in propaganda from a foreign country or a different culture or something over many, many years, and then they're reintroduced into this shining beacon of democracy that we are over here. How is that corrected with them? Or even a larger group after one of the world wars? Like, this isn't the first time a group of people, a large group of people, has been completely misinformed by propaganda. Like, what was the fix before? How long did it take? Can we learn from that? This is where I think we can learn something from history. Maybe I need to go do some homework.
Well, and Jason, we don't even, we can go back, decades and further in history, but we don't have to go back that far. I've heard of cases of North Koreans that escaped into South Korea and the type of, propaganda and being able to integrate them and ingratiate them into the modern world, because it's similar, right? I mean, in North Korea, you have a whole citizenry that is basically just filled with propaganda from birth. So South Korea, I think, would probably it would be interesting to see what they do and how they have been able to respond to that. But you're right. I mean, we have regimes around the world right now that are autocratic, and some worse than others, where that effort takes place when those regimes fall or when those individuals travel elsewhere and escape. So there has to be a template for it.
Yeah, but I guess as I heard you saying that, Brandon, and it made 100% sense, I wrote down government indoctrination program.
You're talking about reverse propaganda.
That's what 70% of the country would call that. If the federal government enlisted a program and incentivized people with money or other government rewards to come learn about the proper way to look at information, I don't know if we're just not at a place where we're mature enough to do that.
Well, and I think that it's a fine line, Craig, right? Because I think the program would have to not tell them what to think, but how to think, like how to think critically. We're not going to tell you what to believe or what you should believe, but we're going to give you the tools. This is what you should utilize to sort out information. There's a lot of information out there. Here's what you should look. Here's what you should ask. Here's what you should think. Here's what you should watch out for, be on guard against. So it's more of, equipping them with the knowledge and information, because that is the biggest complaint that everybody says simultaneously today, right? There's so much information out there. There's all of these different media outlets now bombarding us for our attention. How do we know what to believe? And having engaged with some of these Trump supporters, I have found that I encounter a couple of different things. When I try to present them with facts, sometimes they react very defensively, hyper defensively, engage in personal insults, or just say, well, I have access to exclusive information. You're just being ignorant. I have this exclusive knowledge you don't have, and there is this conspiracy, and you choose to be ignorant and not believe it. So that's one mindset. But another mindset is when I have some of them who do show openness, and I present them with all these facts, and they start to engage, and then their arguments start to fall. I will often get the kind of throwing up of hands, and these people will say, and I've seen this over and over again, well, I don't know what to believe. There's so much information out there. Who knows what the truth is? And then sometimes they'll say, well, we'll never know the truth. So that is part of this issue too. I think at the core, people are susceptible because they don't know what to believe. So they, will find something that, seems attractive or kind of fits. And people want to be able to explain things they don't understand. And conspiracies and paranoia offer an explanation. Even if it's implausible, it gives people the confidence to feel like they're in charge and that they know something. And we know that the world doesn't work that way. The world is messy. We don't always have instantaneous answers, but these conspiracies promise to provide answers where there really isn't any simple solution or simple answer.
Isn't that part of it too? I just feel like our government is completely incapable of solving this problem. I just don't know because I think, Jason, you hit on what really needs to happen. How do we unwind some of this? And everybody's calling for unity and coming together. That's not going to happen. We're not at that spot. There is no path for unity at this point. At this point, we've just got to decide, is it worth even having a conversation about what the rules of this reconciliation should be? And I think the country right now, I don't think we're even convinced that that's a conversation worth having.
If we could survive for 4 more years, you could hope that the new administration made everybody's life some measurable amount better. And then they went, the temperature is lower, my pocketbook's thicker, whatever they're using to measure the value of where their state is in life. But that's too optimistic.
I think you just hit it, Jason. For the next decade, it feels like America's slogan's going to be, we're going to muddle along. There's no what great brass ring are we reaching for? I mean, what are we doing that's going to lead the world in what? I mean, we can't.
The best case scenario right now is we stay together as a united group of states. I mean, that feels like the baseline that we're reaching at right now.
And I'm not trying to be like alarmist, but it feels like
I don't think you can be too alarmist right now.
It just feels like that's a 50-50 proposition right now. And it kind of feels like, we had a good run. Maybe it's just time.
Well, I mean, there's many who are less alarmist who have expressed that sentiment, Craig, that, they've pointed, hey, the Roman Empire lasted this long. Other, I think leaders in the world have lasted this long. Like, we've had a good run. We've been, 230 some years, not too bad. But yeah, I mean, I think the central question is, the instability. I mean, the events of the last 4 years, let alone last week, pointed at the level of instability that we have and political instability. Because when you have political violence, especially if this lasts and this becomes a new norm that we just expect, we're going to have political violence when we have, political events like elections, like inaugurations, like swearing in ceremonies. If we come to expect that, that's something entirely different. And I don't know how long we can survive as a united union of states under that type of behavior. I don't think we can.
And I guess the point I'm trying to make is the government as it's constituted right now is completely incapable of solving these problems. The United States Senate is a disaster and needs to be rethought. It does not represent the United States. It's full of old white dudes from small rural states that have an overbalance of power. And that overbalance of power is leading to nothing getting done. And it's leading to the majority, which are people in larger, more urban states, becoming incredibly frustrated. So you have a Senate that doesn't represent the United States and does nothing. You have a Congress that is gerrymandered into, there are some races that they don't reflect. Nobody has a chance in some of these races.
Yeah, like Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia. Correct. She can say and do anything. She will get reelected.
It's allowing the kooks and the fringe to have it. Matt Gaetz is a not serious person. Why is he on the TV all the time? Because he's in a gerrymandered district in Florida that he can do anything, and there are no consequences for him. And third, we're doing our damnedest to turn the president into a king. And we're doing it willingly. And the other branches of government are participating in it. My point here is that I guess I've just worked myself now completely down the hole. The government as it's constituted right now, there is no path out of this with this setup that I can see. What's the Senate going to do? We impeached the president yesterday. Who really cares?
For the second time, what good did that do us?
And the Senate's going to do what?
I think that needed to be done. Again, practically, what does that do? But it had to be done. I was floored that there were only 10 Republicans who supported it. That was an embarrassment to me. And again, just another shock to the core of, my old party. But yeah, I think it goes back, and we've discussed this. I think, Craig, the only solution is you have to have significant political reform. So getting rid of gerrymandering, political primary and caucus reform for how candidates get nominated and can run, campaign finance reform, all of which cannot happen because the politicians control all of that. They have made the rules and it favors them. And so they're incentivized to do nothing because they wrote the rules that allow them to do nothing. And the problem is they are the only ones who can change those rules. And so they have no incentive to because it benefits them. So again, it's circular. So it's depressing, but I don't see the solution because you would have to change some of those core political practices and they're not going to be changed. They should. They could, but they won't.
In a state of our country right now where we can't get any kind of unity. That's really depressing because it means everything's broken and there's no way to fix it.
Joe Rogan has a great joke about the Constitution. He's like, if Thomas Jefferson walked through a time hole and you took him on a tour and you gave him the lowdown on 2019 or 2020 or 2021, he'd look at you and say, you've got to be shitting me. You're still running on the original doc. We thought you would be on version 10 by now. I wrote that shit with a feather. You're kidding me. You carry around a device in your pocket that has the sum of humans' knowledge in it that you can access at any time. And you bunch of lazy mother, I can't say that last word, you're still running off it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I just feel like the government that we have is completely antiquated, not prepared to deal with this problem. They certainly were not prepared to deal with the pandemic. And where does that leave us? And I guess I got to stop watching Fox all the time, but the feeling that I just keep coming back to, and I just keep asking myself this question over and over: who's coming to help? What help should I expect? Who's going to make it better? All I see is a bunch of people that just want to keep us fighting, arguing to make money and to keep in power. I guess this week has been. You started off, Brandon, to ask us how we felt and how we, now that we're a week out of this, how has we processed some of this. My mood just keeps getting darker and darker because I just don't see where is the exit ramp? Where is the happy ending? Where I just don't see it.
No.
Craig started at the top of the hour with the word dread. I can only imagine it's worse now.
No light at the end of the tunnel. Well, we're close to time. I mean, maybe we should cap this off on a positive note. Like, is there anything that either of us are looking forward to now in 2021? Even if it's small, a glimmer of hope.
I did something positive today. I legally bought marijuana in my home state.
There you go.
That's legal, and you're in Missouri, right?
Yeah.
Legal in Missouri.
You pay $100. You go to a Zoom session with a doctor who, you tell them your problems and they write you the prescription, and there you go. So I consider that easy. I'm sorry, what's that?
It was really that easy.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Again, it's taken them a while to get the program started, but I consider that huge progress. Anything that like 80% of the country thinks should be legal and the state of Missouri finally moves forward with it, I got to count that as a victory.
I'm in Kansas. We'll see in 50 years.
That's pretty much where we are. I mean, think about it, Jason. I mean, Mississippi and Oklahoma and Montana and all these other states already have it, and we don't, and we're going to be dead last at this point.
Let me tell you the Midwestern state that's got their shit together with the sale of cannabis, and that is Oklahoma.
Yeah. I have
not studied this area enough, Craig. Why don't you enlighten us?
You can drive 2 hours south and be in Miami, Oklahoma, a town of nobody, and they have 4 or 5 really, really solid dispensaries there. So I hope Missouri eventually turns into Oklahoma.
Has that improved the local economy? Because I've heard mixed news from like Colorado.
I mean, Colorado, I probably know way too much about this topic, but
this is something different to talk about.
The city of Denver has more dispensaries than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. I think it's like 756 or something like that.
I believe it. I see them all over the place whenever I'm in Denver. Yeah.
I mean, there's times you can stand like in a parking lot at a shopping mall in Denver and do like a 360 twirl, and you can see a pot store everywhere. So I don't know. I just read that Illinois in their first year of rec made like 400 or 500 million or something in tax revenue. And the big one is Cuomo said, all right, we're not letting New Jersey, who just legalized recreation, steal this tax money. They're going to legalize it too. And they think, again, it could be, 1.2 to 1.5 billion in revenue.
Wow.
My only experience with marijuana is in the last fall, my wife and I took a trip to Colorado, and our rental car smelled so bad of pot. We drove around with the windows down while it was freezing outside. It was like you probably could have gotten a contact high from being in the vehicle. And I thought, this is what the economy is like here. You can't even rent a car without.
And Colorado, Jason, I think Colorado is a little bit different because they were one of the earliest states to legalize marijuana. And because of that, they saw this huge influx in many cases of people that moved there because marijuana was legal. So they saw increases, especially in the Denver area, in homelessness and problems related to lack of housing. So they have still been struggling to keep up with just that growth, some of which is due to that. That hasn't been the case, I think, with other states now, because so many states have legalized it that, they've been able to realize the revenue without as many of the problems because it's not novel like it was at the time Colorado legalized it.
Yeah, I remember when Colorado first legalized, and you did have like a friend go out there who hadn't had experience with marijuana or maybe hadn't smoked since they were in college. And, their first weekend there, they ate a 500 milligram little gummy bear, thinking it was a piece of candy, and then left their body for 4 hours. I think they've scaled some of that back. But yeah, this is a great example of why don't we have the ability to have federal laws on the ballot? I mean, why isn't that every 4 years when we elect a president, you get up to 3 federal laws we can all vote on as a country? One would be
like ballot initiative, like a national ballot initiative, like what you have in some states. Yeah.
Direct democracy.
1, take marijuana off the Schedule 1 list. That would pass in a landslide. 2, universal background checks for gun ownership. That would pass in a landslide. And 3, a public option to provide everybody health care. That would win in a landslide.
Wait, is that your chance for election reform then? Because maybe you get campaign finance reform through.
Done through that, because that has broad support too. Yeah, there are a handful of items like that have, 80, 85% plus support among the American public.
Yes. Which politicians will never take care of themselves, right?
I'm always leery of cutting a process out and calling it progress. This is the analogy I'm trying to put together in my mind. The airlines 15, 20 years ago took out all human contact between the customer and the person that works as an airline, right? You could do it all without ever talking to a person. It's almost now desirable to do that. And they built it as an increase in service and as a positive. How? They basically just took their customer service responsibilities to their customer and turned them into a computer screen. And we all kind of accepted that as that was a higher level of service. So I think I was saying, I'm always leery of why do we have to improve something by eliminating contact with the thing that's there to provide us the help and service? In this analogy, it's the government. Why should we fix our problem that we can't get a goddamn thing done in this country by bypassing the complete mechanism that we created to get stuff done?
Because the mechanism is not working.
That's my point. Fix the mechanism.
But
fix it.
But see, the ballot referendum, it works on the local level. I mean, that's the only reason that Missouri has legalized marijuana. It's the only reason that Medicaid expansion happened in Missouri. And that, there's things like that otherwise wouldn't have happened without it. So, there is that bypass mechanism has merit on the state level and local level. So I don't know.
All for trying it.
You went off on a diversion of marijuana, and we ended with the potential to give us some optimism here of how to get out of this mess.
So we're going to go. National ballot initiative is something we need to push.
We need to get a movement behind that. Yeah. Create some.
You might be able to, that could be a cross-party thing there. You might be able to get quite a majority. It would require constitutional
single
right?
Senator would raise billions of dollars to poo-poo that. You mean to tell me you're going to take the ability to decide?
It takes power from them.
That's never going to happen. Never going to happen. Mitch McConnell would that's not going to work.
Lawrence Lessig's been talking about this for like a decade. And I think he always picked candidates that were like your first thing, if you're going to get elected, has to be finance reform or term limits, one of those, and didn't get us anywhere. There's not enough people who think that's the most important thing.
Jason, why would you want that from a candidate where I could just troll the libs for you? Doesn't that just do it for you? I mean, I'm not going to do anything to make your life or your family. I mean, I'm just going to troll the other side. That should be enough, shouldn't it?
But maybe if you're on the extremist wing who thinks your vote was just stolen, you think the system's completely broken and your vote's not counted. And if you're on the other side who sees it was almost dismissed last week, then you're very nervous about how it works. So maybe there's unity in how nobody sees faith in the electoral system right now, and providing an alternative that says you and your peers, your community, the folks in your neighborhood,
there you go,
vote.
I agree, Jason. I think that's something that would unite people, because you have Trump supporters that feel like they have a lack of political power and can't enact change. You have other Americans that feel the same way. Isn't the frustration with the system what really unites all of us in one way or the other?
Yeah, that's how you feed into that. There you go.
I think I just got our new party slogan: unity through skepticism. You guys don't seem to be that enthralled with that. I thought that was really good.
It is good. It's just you can't have your slogan be on something negative and skepticism.
True. It has to be more uplifting, yeah.
But I think you're onto something, that maybe whomever grabs a hold of the Republican Party, or if the Republican Party fractures and we get some sort of new version or two versions of it, it's going to be who can harness a coalition and put it together around these type of being skeptical about the current condition of the government and their ability to do anything.
Right.
Our unity is our disillusionment.
Yes, unity through disillusionment. Still got a little negative connotation to it, but I think we're getting closer.
Well, I think that is our hour.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com, or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.